Welcome back to Sunday Morning Cafe, where our conversations have been revolving around what builds and maintains resilience. I'm remembering a bumper sticker I saw in the 1970s that went like this: Jesus is coming back, and boy is he pissed. By way of contrast, I'm remembering the words of a 20th century mystic by the name of Anthony de Mello, who said, if Jesus came back right now, what do you think he would notice? And his answer was surprising to me, because he said, Jesus would notice the tremendous amounts of good that he sees, the kindnesses that are overflowing all over the place, the generosity in people. And he went on to explain, because in his experience, people who are spiritually developed tend to notice the generosity, tend to notice the good. Oh, they're not Pollyannas. They can see the negative, they can see what's bad, but that doesn't shake their conviction or keep them from seeing the good and appreciating it and celebrating it. And the appreciating of it and the celebrating of it tends to draw it out more. Along the same lines, if you read Abraham Maslow in a certain way, you can see in his existentialist psychology about self-actualization. Self-actualized people tend to do this. And even Lawrence Kohlberg, in his writings about moral development, would say something very similar. People who are morally developed to a certain place will tend to notice the good. Again, they see the negative, but they'll tend to unshakably be able to see the good as well. For example, Martin Luther King Jr. or John Lewis. Do you think they couldn't see the good or the bad? Does anybody think that? No. But they held on to an unshakable conviction about the good in their opponent and even in their enemy. And holding on to that conviction, their intent was to actually transform their enemy through creative acts of courageous love. So, let me ask you this question. What is your conviction about people on the other side? What's your conviction about people who are not going to vote the way you do, or who don't think the way you think, or live where you live? Ask yourself that question. Now, Ignatius of Loyola, Spain, who founded the Society of Jesus in the 16th century, he was a mystic himself. And in his society, he wanted to raise other people to be mystics and to go out and introduce people to a God who wants to be intimate with you, and he made sure they were scholars as well. So you find a lot of those folks, those Jesuits, who want to teach and who want to go places to create creative possibilities for justice. In his constitutions, he wrote, he wanted his Jesuits to assume good intent of the people that they were going to be interacting with, to assume good intent. And through the lens of my profession, I see the wisdom in that. Because what I notice, and my colleagues notice as well, is that in any given interaction, there's a reciprocal nature to the causality in the relationship. So I do or say something, and you take it inside and you process it through your thoughts, through your emotions, your past experiences. You make meaning out of what I've said or done, and then you respond with some behavior that's either verbal or nonverbal. And I process it through the same things, and then a reciprocal pattern develops. Do you see what I'm getting at there? The power in stepping into an interaction with my assumption of your positive intent opens up the possibility for something creative to happen between the two of us. And over time, it has the capacity to change not only you, but me as well. Now, don't get me wrong. I think it's also possible that, assuming good intent, I do run into someone where there's nothing creative comes, but at least I know I've taken care of my side of the street. So it was back in January, before this pandemic hit, I got to be in New York to watch one of my kids' track meets. And you know what people say about New Yorkers and how they're supposed to act? Well, that was not my experience. Now, when I grew up in the Midwest, you'd walk down the street and strangers would wave at you because that's the way it is in the Midwest. Well, they didn't do that in New York because it's too many people. But I found when I was in a store or a restaurant or wherever I went, I was always surprised at the kindness of people, their willingness to enter into conversation, to bring some humor into things, to be helpful. Found the same thing a couple years ago when I got to go with my brother and my daughter to Paris and then London. In Paris, there we are with our maps trying to find our way. Strangers would come up and they would try to help us. Now, Paris is, people always say, they're so rude. That's not my experience. There was a kindness that came our way. I'll never forget in London, I go into a pub thinking, you got to go to a London pub. That's just a thing. So I go in to make my order, and somebody comes up in his British accent and says, "You're in a line, you stepped out of line and you're getting," I think that sounds more Australian, but you get the idea, and he's reprimanding me. And then I say, "I'm sorry, I'm from America, I've never been to London, I didn't even realize this was a line." And the guy goes, "Oh, from America? Well, you're not going to pay for your own beer." And he introduced me to his mates, and I had a great time. Assuming good intent, it opens up possibilities. And so, here this week, I'd like to propose an experiment, kind of a spiritual experiment, a thought experiment. Step into any given interaction with your spouse, with your kids, with your colleagues, with strangers. Assume good intent and see what happens. Assume good intent of those folks who don't think like you, who don't vote like you. Try that on and see what fruit comes of it. See what data shakes out of it. See what impact it has on you and on your relationships. And next week we'll see how that went and hopefully come up with another experiment or two that you can try on to build your resilience. So, I'll see you next week.